Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. At thebibleforum.net. And you can join us. You can get into our chat room and torment these poor souls. Or you can just sit back and listen, watch, and enjoy. Join us here every Sunday night, thebibleforum.net. I want to talk to you tonight about exercise. Do you like exercise? Or do you just hate it? I hate it. I hate every minute of the exercises I do. And I exercise, not as faithfully as I should, but I try to exercise every day. Why do I do that? Well, because I would like, as I age, to be able to get up and move and get out of the chair. And I would like to be able to go outside and do things that need to be done. Just recently, I had to get a new refrigerator. I enjoyed the fact that I was able to pull the one we had away from the wall and out of the way, and that it could make room for the new one when the guy brought it. And, I wasn't just a little old man sitting in a chair saying, well, I'd help you boys, but I can't exercise. But maybe your problem is not overweight. Maybe problem is not being out of shape. Maybe you have other problems. Maybe the doctors have said, you know what, you've got a problem with your sugar. Or maybe you've got a hormonal imbalance of some sort. And they turn around and, of course, they give you pills for that. But if you talk to the right people, very often they can give you a diet for that. And they can combine that with some exercises and, as you begin to get into the sugar diabetes kind of thing in later life perhaps, diet and exercise takes care of it in the beginning. Now, as your body ages and things, it's not going to get better. Once you get it, it's not going anywhere good, but you can stall it with exercise and with diet. But maybe it's feelings as well. Do you just feel blah? We call it depression. You're not really depressed. Not really depressed until you're pretty much in a fetal position all day. There are various stages. You kind of feel blue, and then you feel bummed, and then you feel discouraged, and we have all these other terms we can apply. We like to say, I'm depressed. Well, why are you depressed? Have you ever thought about it? Well, I'm just depressed. Where do you go when you're depressed? Well, I go to a psychiatrist and he gives me medication. Or I go to my doctor and he'll give me stuff that brings me up. Maybe you're depressed because of a dietary issue. There are foods that bring you down. Could be a hormonal issue. Could be just that's your normal. Not everybody's a happy-go-lucky bon vivant. Read the Psalms. David, very melancholy. He didn't take any drugs. But here's my point. We don't like exercise because it's a lot of hard work. But we don't like the problem either. Now, the exercise is not going to fix everything, but it goes a long way. But the Bible teaches us something very important. In Galatians chapter 6. What it says is, is it a brain freeze? What's this say? Oh, it basically says, if you won't work, you won't eat. No, it doesn't say that. Bodily exercise profiteth little. That's the verse that we like to quote, but that's not what it says. What it says is, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. It's called the law of the harvest. And it's our verse, our truism, that cuts both ways, good and ill. It comes in the form of habits. It also comes in the form of addictions. It comes in the form of patterns and in training. We can cultivate habits that are destructive. And by habituation, we can cultivate habits that will change that destruction into something a little more profitable. We can train ourselves to do a better job at something that has to happen, or maybe a hobby. Something we can teach ourselves how to make something so that it really is strong or is good or it's pretty. We can also mindlessly cultivate bad habits and bad patterns over a period of time in our life until we get to the place where we are either not able or not willing to do anything else. And then we just complain about the conclusion. We complain about the things that happen because we've been lazy in our thinking and in our behavior. The world has embraced all sorts of professionals to tell us that it's not our fault. You haven't done anything terrible. You have an addiction. You probably have an addictive personality, or you have a disease, or you're a victim of your parents or of your wife or husband or of circumstances or whatever it is. And when you get advice like that, it just really confuses the issue. But it does provide a very very comfortable living for a bunch of other people. Now, there are legitimate physiological problems that create these things. They're discernible in a laboratory. And I realize that there are some that are stubbornly hiding out in our chromosomes or in our physiology somewhere, and they're never going to be found, but we seem to think they're there. There are similar patterns in all sorts of people, and they are then given these multisyllabic names and a list of symptoms to follow so that others can understand what's happening in their body is not just their imagination. We're talking legitimate science here. And the medical profession is locked into that science. It doesn't matter what Dr. Jones tells you, because Dr. Smith will tell you the exact same thing. If you present the symptoms to 10 doctors, you'll get the same diagnosis with every doctor. But the world of psychotherapy is not like that. It's not as controlled as that. If you present your systems to 10 different counselors, you may get as many as 8 to 12 different diagnoses and an untold number of treatments. And that's not my opinion. The APA, the American Psychiatric Association, used to send people out with a list of what they called presenting problems or presenting symptoms. And they would go to different doctors or others that were doing this sort of work. And what they found is that these people had no clue. There was no control for the diagnoses. And I read years ago that they had actually stopped doing this because it had become such an embarrassment. But God says, if you do this, you will get that. And it'll happen every single time. And what that means is that you can learn to walk. But it also means that if you give in to your fears, you will become more fearful. If you defer to bullies, you will find that the bully bullies you more. If you eat only what you like, you are probably going to develop sugar diabetes. you're probably going to weaken your immune system. You're probably going to weaken your skeletal system. You're probably going to suffer all sorts of systemic problems. Doing what? Just doing what you feel like doing. Go to the wrong doctor, or simply refuse to tell your doctor all the truth. And you will simply get pills. Pills that'll compensate for just about anything you're doing. Find a doctor who tells you the truth, and you will likely be offended and go looking for a new doctor. Can I get an amen? Emotions are the same. If you routinely give in to your emotions, don't be surprised when your life is then governed by those emotions, those feelings. How many people won't go or do something simply because of how it makes them feel? They don't like crowds, so they won't go to church. They don't like people talking all at the same time, so they avoid family get-togethers. They don't like to yield to other people's standards or life patterns. They don't want to defer. So they either never marry or never have a good marriage. Over time, they can begin to feel alone or sad or unwanted. And being human beings, we don't naturally, immediately look at our own social orientation. Being somewhat confident in our own standards, we're convinced that it isn't what it is, it's what I think it is. And we begin to seek out a counselor, someone to analyze what's going on and give them practical advice. Well, given enough time and the honesty of the one suffering, the counselor points out the patterns of your life and says those patterns are the problem. In those cases, what's the patient's response? The response is usually an indignant statement. You obviously don't know what you're doing. I have a serious problem, and you're telling me simply to get a grip. And they storm out the door. It's kind of an inelegant observation, but basically that's exactly what they're being told. You have created your own problem. And you've done that by the way that you have responded to whatever the situation has presented. You are the only one that can ultimately change that. And that's basically what the Christian or the pastor or the biblical counselor ought to be telling folks. Hopefully they are. They're supposed to. They don't always. If you're seeing a counselor for your behavioral or your feeling or some kind of problem like that, and he has labeled your problem with one of the 450 to 500 mental disorders that are found in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, Volume 5, then you have not found a biblical counselor. Either that, or you have found a biblical counselor who is not being honest. Because if they're taking your insurance in payment for the counseling, they're having to report to the insurance company that you have a mental disorder. They don't believe in mental disorders, but they can find one that's similar to what you're going, then at least we can get paid. That's immoral. It's unethical. Find somebody else. The Bible doesn't label your problem with a multisyllabic phrase, cognitive dissonance, bipolar disease, schizophrenia, or any of the other psychological jargon. The biblical counselor will call it what the Bible calls it. And no insurance company is going to pay for that. But then biblical counseling ought to not be a fee-for-service issue, should it? It should never be that. The Bible holds the answers to life's secret for living a balanced existence. If you're not suffering from a chemical or a systemic problem, and you do not have a disease, then you are the one who's causing the problem. How are you doing that? By the way you have learned to respond to whatever it is that life is handing you. There are a multitude of reasons why a person gets into these troubling patterns, and there's a multitude of legitimate issues that have to be taken into account, and there are external influences that contribute, not to mention the unbalanced people in your life who present all sorts of emotionally numbing stimuli. However, the simplest answer is usually not far from being the answer, given the principle of cause and effect. Grow up in a household without love and see how warped your idea of love becomes. Grow up having to fight for everything you want, everything you need, and see how many friends you're able to make, or how long your marriage or your job lasts. Is there a pill for all that? Probably. You just need to find somebody who will diagnose your condition in terms of one of these disorders, and you can be on a tranquilizer or a stimulant the rest of your life, but you won't be fixed. And my observation, 40 years, is the folks who get on these medications usually end up with problems stemming from the medications. Serious problems. But that's where we live. We're at the end of the age. We want that peace and safety. We want that harmony and well-being, but we don't want to give up our rights. We don't want to give up the lifestyle that we've come to enjoy. We don't want to change our responsibilities. I'm sorry, not responsibility, our responses in order to accomplish the goal. We want to continue to live as though nothing is really my fault, or that life is supposed to be love and roses. But most of us have tried to either lose weight or gain weight in our lifetime. And if that's true, you understand the principle. Nothing works until or unless you limit your intake of the empty calories, either in terms of volume or in terms of just food you can't eat and maintain a healthy body. The pills don't work. It takes exercise and it takes discipline. And so does emotional well-being. It may be a lifetime of habit and wrenching this ship of life around to get to the other is horrendous. But the God who made you so you can work without the pills and without all the therapies and without all the junk. He's the only one who actually knows how to fix you. Have you let him try? Or have you bought into this world's panacea for everything? What you sow is what you're going to reap. Because life only works one way.